Hello. I am excited by this topic. I really have. Yeah, this has been, how do I say this? Epigenetics is like, it's where it's at. And I'm not talking about, got to mind my words now. I am not referring to the common understanding, which is methylation. I'm really getting into epigenetics, which started, and I don't know how long this is going to go today. If I want to, I may end up doing this in a series, depending on the level of interest, because I listed this today as biohacking the epigenome. And I use that term because it's become quite popular. It's become the buzzword. And, what I find interesting, pardon me, my nose is a little tiny itchy here. I've had people come to me talking about bioterrorism, bioweapons, and germ warfare is another way that it's being listed. And again, biohacking itself is become a pretty popular marketing term because we're trying to find ways to promote longevity, and really it's not necessary when they talk about biohacking. They're not necessarily talking about the epigenome. They're really, from my perspective, they're talking about biohacking the body, like resetting it, helping it to promote anti-aging, right? That's where I'm seeing it, is in that particular arena where people are really talking about it. I mean, I actually did a reel yesterday for Instagram. I posted it this morning, and it was around the area. It's on. It's a new blend that I've come up with on vitamin D. And well, it's not. Pardon me. That doesn't even sound right. Miss Kitty, oh my gosh. Anyway, so the point to that is, it's not taking vitamin D. I'm not even bottling vitamin D. What I'm talking about is vitamin D. There's a growing number of people, infants. Over half the infants in the United States are born with a vitamin D deficiency. Some people don't have a problem with vitamin D, but there's two layers to vitamin D. As far as the body producing it, which is going to be a hormonal process, and this does get into the epigenome, as well as getting it transported into the cells, which again is all epigenetic. There's a vitamin D receptor. Now, the production of it stems between the liver and the kidneys, and this is important because when the epigenome is reacting to the environment, could be, maybe it's a cycle. Maybe you've been up all day long and now it's time to get some rest. And that's a whole nother conversation, because our sleep cycle is definitely regulated by the stress response. And but that stress response is actually going to cause alterations to liver enzymes, and depending on what is going on in your system, because your epigenetics is unique to you, and depending on what's going on with you, it's going to determine whether or not, in this case, vitamin D is being produced. But that said, if you take it as a supplement, because it's a hormone, but if you take the vitamin, it's not really a vitamin, it's a steroid. It's a steroidal hormone is what vitamin D actually is. But the whole point to all of this is that I was doing a reel on it and talking about epigenetics. And interestingly enough, like I said, biohacking is a very common term that's about how do we biohack the aging process. And there was an article yesterday that was released about Dr. Fauci and a couple of other ones, and that they're all taking vitamin D to promote longevity. So that's why I bring all of that up. This is about epigenetics. So when we're talking about biohacking in this case, taking vitamin D is not a biohacking method at all. The way, when we're talking about, and where I'm coming from right now, biohacking the epigenome, and the importance to this is because it's along the lines of, number one, epigenetic memory. There's also about how your epigenome is responding to the environment right now. And it could be, like I said, it could be that you're getting into the sleep cycle. Women, it could be the menstrual cycle. So there's a number of cycles that we go into that are regulated by the epigenome. At the same time, your epigenome is going to be reacting to your environment. In my latest newsletter, I talk about the fact that we're not 100% in control of what we consume, what the body actually consumes. We like to think that we are, but there's so many things in our environment that are impacting your epigenome. And again, the talk of, everything else that's political out there, I don't want to get, that's not what this is about. But what I want to say is that your epigenome is the stress response. The stress response is your survival mechanism. It is how nature promotes itself. It's how nature survives. And I was in a conversation this morning with someone because they were talking about, well, I don't want to be in survival. I do what I can not to worry, and and so on and so forth, because I'm wanting to thrive. And my theory is, when you recognize what the epigenome is, and you recognize what's actually going on in your epigenome and how complex it is. It was great. I was in an interview recently with a pharmacist, and she pointed out to me, when she was interviewing me, but she made the statement that our system is so complex because it's just constantly filtering information. And that's just it. When you're not 100% at choice with what's in your environment, your system, what it's doing is, it's not a mind-body connection the way I see it. It's actually a brain DNA connection. And the moment that your brain senses any potential threat, it notifies the DNA. And this is the reason why I say sleep cycles are varied, because, sorry, I'm looking at, I always forget the word. I had to look at my books up there. Chronobiology. Chronobiology is significant when it comes to immunity, and it does involve the sleep cycle. But the fact is that there is a very specific pathway that acts like, almost like a CPU unit of a computer, and it notifies the DNA of what's going on, messages that are coming from the brain. The DNA does what it's going to do. It makes adjustments, and it sends messages back to the brain, and all systems go, basically. And this is happening 24/7. This is why biohacking with oils is critical, because we want to do what we can with our mindset. We want to do what we can with our physical, and we want to, eat the right foods. That's what a lot of people are talking about, or take the supplements, like they were saying yesterday, by taking vitamin D. The thing is that the more you take something like vitamin D, it is a steroidal hormone. What you're doing is you're basically letting the body know, don't worry about it. And so you're promoting this stress response, this epigenetic reaction, that it's not producing vitamin D. And then, as I said, as that goes on, what happens is that there's a vitamin D receptor. So there's production, and then there's transportation. So if we're not producing it, it's not even getting into the cells. If you are taking it, it's still not fully getting into the cells. And the only reason I feel confident in saying that is because we're seeing we're seeing an increase in inflammation and inflammatory illnesses and degeneration. And vitamin D is linked to all of that. So when we are talking about biohacking, what I want to say is the fact that when you use oils, the way I want to describe this is, and I did an article not too long ago, it was a response that I provided to somebody who has metastatic prostate cancer that's spread to the lymph and the bones. And they were wanting essential oil suggestions. He's already going through the treatments, but his son, who is an herbalist, contacted me for oils or oil ideas. And what I shared in there, because this gentleman is doing all of his research, is the reasons why you want to use oils and the science to it. And the reason there is plenty of science. There may not be a lot of science to specific oils, like if we're going to talk about Douglas fir, or if we're going to talk about turmeric essential oil, or we're going to talk about black pepper essential oil, and we can go down the whole list. I mean, yes, we know they talk about lavender, we know they talk about geranium, we know we talk about lemon, we can find those things. But what we have to pay closer attention to is when they are identifying these oils, which there's not a lot about that, but what they're really looking at is the constituents within these oils. And there's a lot of constituents that are shared. So a lot of oils have similar constituents. That does not mean, though, that every oil does the same thing. And that is what I'm a big proponent on. It's how the synergy, and this is what I teach. We identify I've devoted like the last 10 to 15 years really identifying what these how the synergy is actually being processed by the system. And really, this is where we talk about biohacking the epigenome, because there's a number of constituents that are known to be able to cross that pathway and communicate directly to the DNA. So the significance of this is that epigenetic memory is real. We sometimes refer to this as generational trauma, cell memory, body memory. These are different terms that we've become familiar with. But what it really is, which is just, I find fascinating, and what I want to share here, because the moment, surviving and thriving is a split second. That split second is recognizing that you are genuinely wired to survive whatever you are facing, And this is it's just captivating. It's fantastic. It excites me, because what they, being scientists, have recognized is that when an organism is subjected to a great deal of physical stress and duress, the epigenome, honestly, already changes as it is. It adapts. It's an adaptive system. It's all it is. It's not like this mechanism of warfare. It's an adaptive mechanism that really supports the survival in the moment. If it's significant enough, and all of us have gone through something that was significant, and if it hasn't been in this lifetime, if you've had just the most exquisite life, now there is moments in history, in your lineage, whether it be famine or floods or, hunger, whatever, fires, epidemics. These things have all been, large catastrophes. This information is housed in all of our epigenome, in all of it. They first began to identify this during the Human Genome Project, when they recognized an imprint on the human immune system that originated around the mid-14th century during the Black Plague. And what that signifies to me, number one, is that we as humans, we're sitting here right now because someone in our lineage survived. Because alterations occurred, the epigenome adapted, and the immune system did what it did so that our family line was able to move on, persevere, and thrive. Granted, they didn't know anything about any of this back then, but this is what happened. And then if you think about it, from the 1300s until today, there has been such an advancement in technology that it's very easy to say that our systems have been exposed to a lot, and major changes have been occurring along the way. So that said, that was the first, I shouldn't say it was the first, I think they identified it as the 64th significant imprint that's occurred on the human genome. But subsequently, with Francis Crick's work and a number of universities throughout the United States and around the world, they've been able to identify that these actually, and it's fabulous studies that have occurred. People that were in, whose family line was in Auschwitz, they are able to identify that even though the people today didn't live through that, their still behaviors that are coming forward that would be considered linked to a catastrophic, just horrible event like that. So the point of that is that this is the way nature makes an imprint. Like, okay, this is what you've done. If you can imagine for a moment a tree that is on the side of a mountain and the wind's constantly blowing over that tree, eventually that tree is going to grow like this. It's going to kind of like start to tilt sideways. The same thing can be said for any trees that are growing around electrical wires. You can actually see the way they will grow to get away from that significant energy. So there's changes that are occurring to the tree's DNA, to the epigenome of that tree, in order for it to survive. That is the fascinating part. That is epigenetic memory. And without us even knowing it, it is firing. It's whenever when the brain goes, whoops, whether it be, and what I wanted to say was, like, the brain will recognize facial expressions. They've actually been able to take it down to the eyes, like just the significance of the pupil movement of the eyes. This stuff happens so quickly in the brain. I mean, it's instant, and it's automatically sending. I mean, we can't even fathom how quick this is happening, that it's notifying the DNA, and the next thing you know, the chemistry changes and you're being triggered. This is where the fears come from. This is where, when all of a sudden we're out somewhere, it could be a smell. Could be a smell, could be something that we see, could be something that we hear. But these triggers are coming from that epigenetic memory. Maybe there was something horrible in your life that was very traumatic. That is going to be that. So that this is not to say that these triggers aren't real. This is just to say this is why we feel like we are reliving certain circumstances. And interestingly enough, when I was reading, when I was kind of looking at all this vitamin D stuff, and I created this blend, what I found is that they're saying that low levels of vitamin D put you at a higher risk for PTSD. So that is because it's the epigenome keeping you in that familiar, safe zone. And so it's firing. But again, we can thrive at the same time that we notice that our body is trying to survive, or our brain is trying to survive. Because the thriving happens the moment you realize, this is for my advantage. This is reminding me that I need to be on guard, but maybe you don't need to be on guard. Maybe it is something to be aware of. Sometimes, I don't know, I've actually walked into places and suddenly find myself really anxious, and I just wonder if there's an aroma. It used to be like that with coffee. There used to be a time in my life that being around the smell of coffee used to agitate the fool out of me. And I finally put two and two together. And that's because when I was really little and we would go travel, we always left in the middle of the night because my dad liked to drive when it was cooler and there was less traffic on the road, and made complete sense. But my parents had a very tense relationship. And I think my mother was really rather nervous about driving at night. And so she would do her thing, Dad would do his thing. And so there was tension. And I picked up on that tension. So every time coffee was brewing, the smell of coffee would set me off. And I couldn't figure out what that was. And once I realized what it was, I was able to self-regulate. And that's the advantage of actually using oils, because they will help you self-regulate, especially if you're using them in accordance with what your body actually is needing. I am very big on patient safety, because if you're taking medications, they do not play well together. You have to know how to blend them or integrate them. But at the same time, I just really want to say that, and that's the reason why I actually created my what I called my first aid protection kit, because they are oils that will help with the immediate concern. At the same time, if you learn how to use them on a daily basis, part of your daily routine, and if it's that or something else, but something that is, really super good for you, what you've got going on is you've got this extra protection. Because, and by protection, I mean, is it's helping your system. The thing is, with epigenetic memory and everything else that we have going on in the environment, it's a significant thing to remember that, as this doctor was telling me, you know, this is a very complex filtering system that we have, this body. It's constantly filtering information. And what I want to get at is, with the advancement of technology and all of the things that we have, and not having 100% say over what our body is being exposed to, and I use the word consume because it doesn't necessarily mean you're eating and drinking it. You could be inhaling it. It could just be, you know, you could be putting it on your skin. It doesn't make any difference. But the point is that your body's exposed to things. You don't have a 100% say over it. And you've got other things going. You've got your own cycles, your own system happening. It's a lot of information happening all at one time. The inclusion of oils, what this does is, because all this, I want to just sum this up by saying what that means is that your epigenome, which is your stress response, is on high alert. It's active. It is constantly active. It's like it's got its guard up. The radars are up. You know, the brain's paying attention. Everything's on high. This is fair to say for most of us, if not all of us, unless, you know, it could be, we don't need to get into everything, but the bottom line is, for the good percentage of human beings on the planet, we are on high alert. The inclusion of essential oils into a daily routine protects you from chemicals that might be in the air, heavy metals. You know, it doesn't make any difference what's in the air. Just it's what it's doing. I'm putting a pause on it for a minute, because what I want to say is this: the difference between what I'm suggesting about oils and what's common is, I don't want the oils just to be about the symptoms, like the anxiety and the agitation and so forth. The point to actually using them on the daily routine is it provides a negative feedback. Now, what do I mean by that? So homeostasis is the body's ability to self-regulate. Okay, so that is the epigenome going, okay, high alert, okay, we need to have, you know, this sleep cycle needs to be activated, the menstrual cycle that's what the epigenome is constantly doing, okay, on top of everything else. That means that basically, if you were to look at it, it's like the gas is full on. When you use oils in such a way that promotes rest and digest for your system, because keep in mind, the diversification of the epigenome was so significant that they remarked about it back from the 14th century, and then through the advancement of technology and all of the chemicals that we currently have, every epigenome is as unique as your fingerprint. So that said, your system is full on, depending on what it's presenting with, meaning symptoms and discomforts and, you know, your sleep cycle and how well you digest food, all of that. When you take all of that into consideration and you use an oil, like I said, as a negative feedback, that means it's taking that full on and it's putting a pause on it. That's all it is. It's putting a pause on it. It's telling the body, take a breath. We got this. You're okay. And it's providing that negative feedback, because the full on is called positive feedback. So the oils provide a negative feedback. So besides the symptom relief, this is what system relief is. It's that negative feedback that now invites the body to regulate and provides homeostasis so that the inflammation can settle. And that the body, and the way that happens is, now when the epigenome slips into that rest and digest state, guess what it starts producing? It starts producing melatonin, which is actually an anti-inflammatory hormone. We recognize it for sleep because it does relax us so much so that we can get some sleep, so that any inflammation that built up during the day can now be relieved. Glutathione, another one, major antioxidant that the body produces. But it can't do that as long as it's full on. So by giving our body a chance and biohacking with oils on a daily basis as a routine, not just for symptoms, but for the systemic relief, puts the brake on and gives your system a chance to go, okay, I can break down the macronutrients. We can have the antioxidants. We can relieve the inflammation. We can stop producing oxidative stress. So, and it's not that you'll never need it, because if you walk through, a cloud of chemicals maybe that you can't smell, but they're out there, your body needs to be able to kick on in order to metabolize and eliminate that. That's part of the epigenome, because the liver needs to be able to break these things down so that you can actually eliminate them, flush them and eliminate them. So using oils, and that's what I like to teach, is how do we blend them? Do we, besides just symptom relief, and I like to take all the different systems into account, because if you've been on on chronic high, what's happening is your, digestion's not functioning properly, lymph system's not functioning properly, and as you start to dump oxidative stress, you want to make sure that you protect the bowels as well as the urinary tract, because that's what's going to happen. And you also want to make sure that the skin is taken care of, because as you put oils on the skin, I don't recommend ingesting them, because that disrupts the microbiome. But when you put them on the skin, if your lymph isn't moving, what happens with that is that the oils actually have chemicals that increase tissue permeability. And all that means is that when they're being absorbed, it increases the ability to absorb. And this is why we have nanotechnology. This is why we have emulsifiers. This is why we have colloidal ingredients, because they understand how these plant components actually work. So, and that's why you have medications that are patches, because they can increase tissue permeability and it becomes absorbed. So that's another reason why you don't need to ingest it. But that said, if you have a development of yeast in the system, or there is a high level of oxidative stress and inflammation, if you're not careful with the way if you're just focused on symptoms, then what happens is it'll push it back out through the skin. Sometimes it'll even do that if you are focused on the whole system, because you've got to get that lymph system. And it also tells me, as your guide, that we need to adjust the way you're using the oils so that your body can begin to eliminate, because it's dumping faster than it can eliminate. That's what I wanted to say. So biohacking with essential oils, biohacking the epigenome, is really about including oils as a daily routine. That's more than symptom relief, that helps. And that's where the system relief comes in, because they have components that are able to cross that pathway and let the DNA know. Like, let's just say, for example, you're out and about, so the example is that you've had a traumatic experience in your life. Maybe it was a car accident. Maybe it was something even much worse. And certain sounds, certain people, certain environments will set you off. When you use oils, it's going to take some time, because I want to make sure that I say this. Oils are not the savior, and they are not the be-all, end-all. This takes an integration. If you're taking medications, you want to integrate with medication. If you're doing therapy, you want to integrate it with therapy. It is an adjunctive treatment. That's the reason why I don't ever say it will take the place of medicine. If you've gotten to the point where you've been diagnosed with something, chances are that a remedy like an essential oil is not going to be enough. You have to learn how to integrate with whatever else it is you're doing. If it's your mission or your goal to come off of these other things or stop these other things, you can begin to work. And this is where working with the oils, working with someone like me, will actually help you make that transition, so that you can begin to use these on a daily basis and eventually not need anything else. But this is about integration. It's an adjunctive treatment to, at least when you get started. So that said, if you've had a traumatic experience and you include oils, and I always like to recommend olfactory therapy. I had a school contact me today and invite me to come over there and do and all it is just smelling it, because there's a structure at the top of your nose called the olfactory tubercle that connects to every area of the brain. This is why just inhaling them close up, it's better than a diffuser. But if you inhale them, it will actually innervate the entire brain and begin to help rewire rewire the neuroplasticity to become more responsive and less reactive. And over time, with intentional use like that, when you're being, when you know that you can be triggered, over time, what ultimately happens is that you no longer find yourself triggered like that you can be in places and around people and feel at ease and not have to rely on something to help you catch that, to kind of catch that hook. So I don't know if this makes any sense, but if you have any questions, feel free to comment. Like I said, I have the emergency protective kit, and I just did this one for vitamin D. It's not a vitamin D supplement. What it is it supports the hormonal system so the body can actually begin to not only produce more vitamin D, but as well as transport it. So it helps to slow down that stress response. There's very specific systemic enzymes that they've discovered that are linked to being able to make this happen. And, fortunately, those components do exist within oils. So that's packaged. And what I love it for is because it's going to help relieve anxiety. It's going to help relieve sadness if there's any level of sadness, and definitely protect you from those triggers. So, but like I said, if you have any questions, definitely comment below. I'm happy to get on a phone call with you. I love talking about this. Next week, I'm going to be back at the same time, which is 4 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to be talking about essential oils and narcissism. I have my own personal experience with narcissism or narcissistic behaviors or tendencies, but I have a real strong theory about this. As a neuroaromatherapist, the benefits of how we can, it's not to fix anybody. And for that matter, it might be something that you want to use for yourself if you are subjected to a relationship like that. But it's also something to consider when we get into this next week about children. Because we don't want, we want to help them not have to deal with these, I don't want to call it it's not a mental, it's more of a mood. And I will just say this much before I close. When we're talking about epigenetics, and now obviously I will be talking more about that next week, but when we're talking about epigenetics, there's changes that occur in the brain. Okay, so the brain picks up a threat, notifies the DNA, and the DNA sends messages back, which now, like I said, the message back is start producing oxidative stress, send out the message. So the brain does what it does to produce the neurochemistry that is going to lead to more inflammation because it's in protection mode. It does not know the difference between, a true threat, meaning like your house is burning down, or a daily worry, your chronic worry about a bill or somebody, how somebody's doing or what somebody's going to think. Those emotional distresses, it doesn't register the difference. It doesn't know the difference. This is where having those oils and smelling them makes all the difference, because you can bring awareness to what you're going through, and then remind yourself, no, this is like, my house isn't burning down. I can take a breath right now. But that said, it changes the chemistry in the brain. And there's a distinct difference between cognitive control versus habitual control. And we see this with addiction, which is the habitual control. We see this with, I've seen it a lot with autism. All the kids that I've supported with autism, a lot of habitual control. That's where the stimming comes from. At the same time, cognitive control is the ability for critical thinking. So when we look at something like this, and next week when we talk about narcissistic tendencies, we can start to look at how this is manifesting as habitual control. When you just look at some of the behaviors that they talk about, and how we can, and I might even come to the table with some ideas for oils that would be possibly beneficial for people. Yeah, I'll come up with some. I don't really like to make some general suggestions, but I'm not going to formulate a blend. What I will do is I will talk about certain oils and how they work to kind of give you an idea. So that's next week. essential oils and narcissistic tendencies. So I hope to see you then. And like I said, let me know if you have any questions down below. I appreciate this chance to take, you sharing your time, because we only have so much time and it's very precious. So you sharing your time with me is an exquisite gift, and I just want to say thank you. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, have a beautiful weekend, and I look forward to hearing from you. Take care.